Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cycling Culture Club Connections. Today we sit down with Jess Morgan. Jess works for Rapha here in the UK and has been massively influential in diversifying cycling on the roads of London. Rapha has played no small part of that as well, and I think Jess has been a massive driving force behind that. I had an absolutely brilliant conversation with her. She wasn't super keen to come and chat with me, but by the time we were done, I think she was glad she did. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. As always, let me know if you have any feedback, and give Jess a follow on Instagram. You can find it under Scoot. But without further ado, into the episode. Cheers. Good evening. Hello, Jess.
Hello, Miles. Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Very welcome. Anytime.
It's now on the record, by the way, so anytime. No, thank you so much. We were just talking offline about, this is potentially your first podcast that you have graced yourself with.
It is. After rejecting multiple requests out of pure nervousness, you finally managed to wrestle me into doing a podcast.
I don't know what that says about me. Hopefully good things. No, I just want to say I really appreciate your time. You're a super busy lady, and there's a lot going on in your life. So it's really important, and really glad to have you here. As with everybody who sat here and had this kind of chat, and it's really important for me to sort of understand like the early context about you. Like, we know each other semi well, but I definitely don't know the deep-rooted stories and little anecdotes that make you you, and I'm really familiar with your work, but what about you? I'd love to hear a bit about your journey and how you got to being sat here with me today.
Well, my journey into cycling was quite unusual, I would probably say, compared to a lot of people's, because I was really not a sporty child at all. I used to avoid sports at all costs. I think I did long distance running because it just meant I could chat to my friend and we could just walk slowly at the back. So yeah, I didn't do any kind of sports at school. The only reason that I started cycling was when I'd come back to London for uni and I just needed a way to get around. So it was a purely functional sort of reason. And I think even before I got a bike, I used to say that I would never cycle in London because everyone looks so miserable when they're cycling. Like, why would anyone ride a bike in London? They just look really, really unhappy. So I quickly ate my words because I realized that getting the tube around was quite expensive and the bus. So I got a really cheap bike for £5 from one of those shops at a dump in Hampshire. Really random.
£5?
£5. It was like a kid's bike, because I'm short, so it was like a mountain bike, and I got it for a £5. And I took it back to London and I started riding it around, and I got a lock for it that was really unsuitable, and it got stolen. But my boyfriend at the time was really into the fixed gear kind of scene, and he had a fixed gear bike, and he offered to build me a bike. And then he built me this really beautiful purple single speed with purple wheels and really nice fluted steel tubing. And
nice.
I just fell in love with that bike and loved riding it and started to really enjoy getting around town. And then through having that bike and kind of being introduced to the whole concept of like fixed gear and single speed, I met this community, which is like the LFGSS, London Fixed Gear and Single Speed Forum kind of community, and started hanging around with some people like that. And that's when I sort of realized that cycling wasn't just a way to get from A to B. It was actually a way to meet people and make new friends and see new places and go to the pub and do something that wasn't just going to the pub, but actually there was an activity tied to it that was quite exciting and quite really different. Like, as I said, I'd never done any sports before, so the whole idea of like pushing myself physically was novel, and to do it with like a bunch of new friends was also really cool. So yeah, I started doing more fixed gear riding and made loads of friends in that scene, and everyone was very welcoming. So I started to do a little bit more cycling. I rode from London to Brighton fixed, and it nearly killed me. I threw an absolute wobbler at the bottom of Ditchling Beacon and walked the entire way up because I was like, I'm not cycling anymore. I didn't eat anything, basically. I did the first.
Classic cyclist mistake.
Yeah. I failed the first test of the long distance ride, and at the pub, I just had half a pint of cider. And thought that would be enough to get me to Brighton. So yeah, so that's sort of my first sort of way into cycling before I did before I had a bike with gears, before I did any kind of road riding or track cycling. Yeah, that was my in.
I want to hear more about this purple speed machine. I don't know why, but I feel like you're the sort of person who maybe gave it a name.
Oh, I didn't actually.
Did you not?
Yeah, I think people expected me to give it a name, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So edgy.
I know. I was like, yeah, you can't predict me. No, it was just. I think it didn't even have like a recognizable. It was called like a rider, so it was a really ambiguous name. Like I've never seen any since, but it was like it was beautiful. I'll send you a picture because it was really really nice.
Please do. We'll post it alongside the podcast.
Yeah.
Have you still got it?
No, I sold it. So I replaced it with a yellow Panasonic, which I still have.
I've seen that on your Instagram. That is a proper classic.
Yeah. So I upgraded, and then I've never been able to get rid of that Panasonic because it's too close to my heart.
Yeah. And you won't see, well, I don't think I've ever seen another. So I suspect there's probably very few out in the general public. So hold on to that
I
one.
actually imported that frame from Japan.
Wow. At huge personal cost, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a lot of money for a student, an art student to spend. But spend it I did.
Things we do for cycling. I could name many a thing I've bought that I couldn't afford over the years because I felt like it was just the right thing to do for my sport.
So worth it. No regrets. None.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so that brings you to, I suppose, your semi-contemporary life. At this point, you're riding fixed gear. It's a thriving London community. Where is this pre-Red Hook times? Okay, so pre-Red Hook, so also pre-London Nocturne.
It was kind of like the London Nocturne was happening, but it was sort of just around the time that it was happening, and I heard about it, and I actually started to go to the London Nocturne with all my fixed gear friends, sort of before I worked at Rapha.
Funny. Yeah, it's funny because I think that was mine, and I think a lot of my contemporaries' first connection with fixed gear. It wasn't like, if you weren't in the know, you weren't in the know. Like it took me years to discover LGFS and stuff like that, and inevitably I went down that same path, bought a fixed gear, probably more expensive than, it's probably the most expensive thing I owned at that time, for no reason, because it's got no parts on it. But that whole subculture is like really interesting, and you'd be surprised. I'd say like this is podcast number 5, and I think 2 of my previous guests came through some sort of fixed gear related activity. So there's something in that like community power of the fixed gear, the simplicity, the slightly like the edgy vibe, the slightly punk-ish like rebel against society. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think it just seemed like a really fun group of people. Like people weren't too kind of snobby about the bikes. Like there was obviously people had strong opinions about things, but there wasn't the same elitism that I think you find in road cycling, or like the barrier to entry. Like you didn't really need to know that much about cycling to get into it and be accepted. Like people would be there to kind of tell you things, or show you the way, or give you advice. Like people were very open and very very giving. In that sense. So I think rather than be put off by the whole fact that I didn't know anything about cycling, it actually like everyone made me feel so welcome and like kept inviting me back to things and kept giving me advice on things to do, that it just made me want to come back for more, which I think was, yeah, definitely an important thing that's like kept me in cycling, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That sort of that welcoming nature and community is, I think, what everyone can benefit from and needs in their life. And if they don't have it, that's when we lose people from this sport, from this subculture. And it's funny now you mention it. I started to see that pick up in your work over the more recent years, which we'll get to. But like that sort of element of grasping community and helping it build and flourish is what I personally really, really recognize you for. So again, we'll come back to it in a minute, but I think that's a really interesting through line between like where you started and potentially why that's such a strong like point of your personality. Like community is all.
Yeah.
No, super cool. So I suppose where are we now? We're riding fixed gear. Have we tried road riding yet at this point?
No, no, gears were the enemy at that point still. Yeah, to have gears was to be cheating. So I was, yeah, just ride. I just had one bike that I used for everything, whether it was just to pop down the shops or to go to Brighton or Cambridge. Um, but it was through knowing people in the fixed gear scene that I then got a job at Rapha. And actually, at the same time, I also started going to Herne Hill, because every year LFGSS used to run a track day at Herne Hill, and somebody put my name down to race without asking me. They just put my name down to race in one of the women's races, and I was like, oh God, guess I better go and do some sessions then. Otherwise, I'm going to really embarrass myself in this race that someone signed me up for. So rather than just be like, no, I'm not doing it and taking my name off, I was like, oh, I'll just go and like try it out, see what it's about. And yeah, and again, it was a really welcoming community there. I went to the women's sessions, and everyone was just so friendly and nice, and they made it really easy, even though it was, it's a pretty scary thing to go up and start riding track. They just made the experience really unscary and really welcoming, and again, like would invite you back to things. And the club there, VCL, was the first cycling club that I ever joined because one of the coaches was like, oh, you look like you're getting on really well. Do you want to join the club? And then you can do more sessions. We can support you with racing. So that's why I joined the club and started racing at Herne Hills, because you just had this kind of really friendly, welcoming community of people who were just always there and always just willing to sort of help out and, yeah, just try and get more people into their community. So then I got really into track cycling as well before I had a road bike.
So still resisting the urge for gears, but still thriving on that community thread. So VCL is Velo Club Londres, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just for anyone listening outside the UK. And they've got to be in the top five biggest clubs in London, right?
They're pretty big, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I to be honest, I only see them at Herne Hill, but there are a lot of them, and it's like, they've produced all these amazing cyclists, like Fred Wright is one of their, like Ethan Hayter, like kind of a lot of the London-based cyclists have sort of come from that VC, and a lot of like other. I'm trying to think of them. I can't think. There's other newer, even younger cyclists as well who are just like starting to come through the pro ranks, that have all come from that club, because
It's
it's just
amazing.
so like amazing at producing talent.
Some sort of secret sauce
I know.
for sure. Okay, so you joined the club and you spent a lot of time at Herne Hill. Again, for anyone listening not from the UK, Herne Hill is like one of the oldest velodromes in the UK. It's outside and doesn't have traditional wooden boards because obviously it's outside and that wouldn't work. But I think it's fair to say it's probably one of the most iconic cycling locations, if not in the UK, certainly in London. It's actually one of the places that I actually did go as a kid because I was born in Crystal Palace, so not a million miles away. But I regret to say I've spent shockingly little time there, really. what were you getting involved in during that time? Like women's racing, but like, was it, yeah, tell me a bit about it.
Yeah, so there's a women's session that still runs now, and it's on a Sunday afternoon. It's a bit of a weird time. It's at 5 till 7 p.m. Um, so you kind of have to really plan your day to go to it, but it's so worth it. And in that you do skills sections, but then you also do some mock racing at the end. And they do it in such a way that even if you're scared of racing and like that's not the kind of thing that you don't consider yourself a competitive person, which I didn't at the time because I was still in the kind of I'm not sporty phase mindset of like, yeah, I'm riding a bike all the time, but I'm still not sporty or competitive. They did it in such a way that even if you didn't consider yourself to be a competitive person, you kind of got into it. And yeah, I just found it really fun. And then having gone to a couple of those women's sessions, they said, "Oh, we're going to do a women's racing event. Like, you should do it. You guys have been doing racing for a couple of weeks." And I'd made some friends in this session who, all continued cycling like through the summer and then for like many years afterwards. So we all kind of became friends in this session and then started racing. And yeah, and it was scary, but it also was just so fun. It's such a contained situation, like such a contained environment. Like you know exactly what's going to happen. The races are quite short. If you get dropped, it doesn't really matter because you've probably only got like 8 laps. And if you don't, then you might get a podium or might win a sprint. And it's just like it was really empowering. It felt really empowering at the time to kind of just be breaking kind of beyond the boundaries that I thought I was kind of constricted to. And yeah, get a bit competitive, and I really enjoyed it. Even though I wasn't amazing at it, but I wasn't terrible at it. So I was just good enough to enjoy it, I think, was probably the way that I did it.
I mean, yeah, I think that's always the fine line, isn't it? If you're too bad at something, it takes a huge amount of energy to just stick to it, and most people don't have that willpower. So yeah, if you can run the line, then I think that helps. You mentioned something really interesting there about the barriers that you were constricted to. I'd be interested to pick that apart a little bit. Like, what were some of those barriers in your mind at the time? I know one of them is I'm not sporty. But was there anything else that in your mind that you're thinking, this doesn't feel, it feels like I need to break through this?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that it was just an all women kind of environment just made it a lot less scary. I think even in the kind of fixed gear world, like it's still mostly men. I think as cycling communities go, it's a more diverse group of people, but it's still more male dominated. And I don't think I would have considered doing anything like competitive while in that kind of group. Whereas when you're going to like it's specifically the women's session, and you're just encouraged to push yourself in a way, and you kind of are willing to do it because you're only in front of other women, so you kind of don't feel embarrassed to fail as much as you would if you were in a mixed group for some reason. So yeah, I think that was just that. You don't want to be bad and of like at something in front of all your friends, but if you're in a specific environment where it's just, oh, we're all in the same boat, we're all new to racing, it doesn't really matter if like, one of us is a bit rubbish because we're all a bit rubbish. And yeah, it just made it, that was very freeing. So yeah, I think that's probably the main barrier, is like you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of people, and this made it so that it was so impossible to embarrass yourself that it made it more fun, basically.
That's great. I can't help but feel that sort of vibe and that sort of energy found its way to your job at Rapha. Like, where were you? So I don't know if you'd already got the job by this point, but where did you start within Rapha?
So I started working at Rapha when I was still at uni. So I was doing a master's at the Royal College of Art, and I was just doing all this kind of, arty stuff.
Painting and stuff.
Still in my like I'm going to be a graphic designer phase. And then instead of getting a job in a shop, which is what I used to do, I just used to work in shops on the weekend, because I knew someone in the fixed gear. Well, they were like, oh, we know someone at Rapha. He's looking for some help in the warehouse at Rapha, in their head office in Kentish Town, because at this point, it's like 2012, and Rapha's entire warehouse for sending out all of the orders for the entire world except for America all came from Kentish Town, from the main office. It was just a floor sandwiched in between like two other offices, basically. And they just used to hire lots of students and sort of, people who just wanted part-time work or 0 hours to just pick orders. There'd be a pile of A4 pieces of paper with people's web orders, and you just pick them up and just pick things off the shelves, pack them up and post them. So I did that for the summer of 2012. And then when the warehouse kind of ended up moving outside of London, they asked if I wanted to come back and work in returns. So I just kept doing that just as a kind of part-time on-off thing while I was studying. And it wasn't until after I graduated and I did one freelance job after graduating that was related to my degree. And then I couldn't get another job, basically. So I thought, oh God, need some cash. Better go back to Rapha, go and work in returns for a bit. It was Christmas, so I knew they'd be busy. So I was like, all right, I'll just go back and do a month or so. And while I was there, I heard that the guy who did the events in the UK was looking for someone to help him with the following year's events. So I just cornered him in the kitchen one day. I was like, oh, you should hire me. I'm really good at events, because I'd organized exhibitions and things like that at that point. So I was like, I could do that. So yeah, I just basically forced him into giving me a job. So
great. And the rest is history.
And I've been here ever since. That was 2013, I think.
So 10, 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Time flies, but you've done a lot in that time.
Yeah.
Done a lot. So I know from our conversations, and as I say, I'm familiar with a lot of what you get up to in the cycling scene, but I'm really aware, and it's part of the reason I wanted to chat to you on this podcast, was the amount of energy that you put into getting more women into cycling. I think is incredible. I'd love to know where the genesis of that was, though. Like, what was that point when you're like, you know what, I think I can make a difference in this. I'm in a position where I can move things along. How do I actually do it?
I think a lot of it comes from the Rapha Women's 100, actually, because that started, I think, the year that I started at Rapha. I think it was like 2013 or 14. So that was the first year, and I vaguely remember the first one happening, but I wasn't involved with it. So it was the second one after that, or maybe the third, that I actually started to be involved with the actual organising and seeing how one concept, so the Women's 100, is where there's one day, it's in September now, that the idea is that you just ride 100K, and wherever you are in the world, you could do it by yourself, you could do it with other women, or you could do it with a partner, or like whoever. All you have to do is just ride 100K, knowing that around the world, other women are riding 100K as well. And there's something really kind of simple and compelling about that makes lots of people do it. And it's just really cool that now you see on that day, especially in London or like in the UK, on that day you'll see so many groups of women riding together. And it's become this sort of one-day movement of like women just like rising up and just going for a bike ride and sharing the experience. Like, even if they've ridden 100K before, or it's the first time they've ever done it, it's just really nice that concept has landed so well to see all of these people come out on the same day and do it together. So I think seeing that happening from like on a smaller scale, but just seeing the impact that it had, and the fact that those people would then keep coming back and keep growing and keep pushing themselves and staying in cycling, I just thought that was really cool. So I just wanted to do more of it, I suppose.
So how did it evolve? So from year one, which was the year you started, through to now, still a thing, right?
Yeah.
So how has it evolved over the years?
So the year it started, it was actually linked to the Étape de Tour,
Oh,
which yeah, it's which is when you ride the Queen stage of the Tour de France, and it's any cyclist can sign up to do it, but the issue is that it's overwhelmingly male. Like it's mostly, I think, it's less than 10% women or any other gender. It's yeah. So I think what Rapha intended in the first place was to get more women to ride in the Etape Tour. And I think because it was 100K that year, I think that's why it was like became the Women's 100 because all you had to do was 100K, which is really hard 100K because it's the Queen stage of the tour. And they tried to get as many women from the office to go and do it. So it started off as a very like internally led thing. It was like a women's focused initiative to get more, or like to support women from Rapha to go and ride the Etape. So it's like all the women in the office just like weren't, they just all went to France and rode the Etape on that day. So I think it came from that. So I think that's the really nice kind of origin story of it because it was all about encouraging and supporting women at Rapha to go and do this thing that, they might not otherwise have done. And to show themselves and other people like, yeah, you can go and do the Etape, even if you're a woman. It's seen as this really, really hard event. And I have done it and it is really hard. But there's so few women that do it that, all the crowd, there's like all French people standing on the side of the hill and they're like, vive la fille, because they're like, oh wow, like a woman. So it's so unusual, like they'll call you out and be like, well done, allez les filles. And it was just a really cool thing. So that's how it started. And then yeah, I think it just grew into this more global, more accessible thing that you could do anywhere. You didn't necessarily have to go to France to go and do it, and you didn't necessarily have to do a really hard route. It's just all about doing that 100K, which is not an easy ride, but also not impossible for people if you train for it and you put your mind to it. So I think it's just grown and become a symbol of like, if you want to get into cycling and you want to give yourself a goal, this is something that you can do and know that you'll kind of have the support, even if it's like invisible support of loads of women doing it around the world at the same time.
yeah, it's amazing if you think about it. Like the Etape de Tour in itself is a massive challenge, but to be doing that event as a minority in itself is an even bigger challenge because you're like, I don't have the same support. I don't have as many people to ask for their opinion or for their help. Even just like that kind of camaraderie that you get from riding with people who are like that becomes a whole nother layer of difficulty for people. So yeah, I think that's a really. I had no idea actually that it was tied to the attack back in the day. Um, and now it's like this sort of, as you say, this invisible force that people can tap into. Do you have any data? Like, do you know how many people participate in the Women's 100 or?
Yes, so we do. We have it on Strava, so it's a Strava challenge, and I think it was like something absolutely bonkers, like 100,000 people signed up, but not all of them are women because I think people have realized that you can just sign up to it and just do the 100K on the day. So I don't know what the actual like real numbers are, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's okay. But do you think that? How do you feel about that? Like guys and other genders like joining that event. Do you feel positive or otherwise?
I mean, I think if they're doing it to like support women, like to kind of show like their allyship and be like, go women, um, on the day, then that's cool. I think there's something really special about the official rides that we do, which are women only, and we try and get as many female ride leaders as possible. We try and just staff it with as many women as possible, so it just becomes this just like super nice kind of atmosphere, which you don't get in mixed, like as great as all mixed events can be, and I don't think everything should be women only, but sometimes when you do have a women only group, it just has a different kind of atmosphere to it, and it's really, really nice. And so when you've got that on a scale of like 100 women all riding together, and then everyone finishes at the end and they're all just like chatting and sharing all the stories about their rides, it's really nice. It's really lovely to see, and it's that's the most special part of the women's 100 for me. It's like the ending where everyone's just yapping away and drinking a beer.
Sounds great. I think that's one of those things you want to be able to bottle and like show to women who are maybe like less inclined to come along and be like, this is what you're missing out on. There's a lot of data, unfortunately, about, women find it harder to get into cycling for a number of reasons, but the one that's always like near the top of the list is safety.
Yeah.
So like riding in a group of like-minded individuals, like it must be super powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And like knowing that you're with other people who are in the same boat as you, like not feeling like you're going to slow people down, or like, you don't know as much as the other people, which I think can often happen. But just, yeah, knowing that you're just with a group of other women and you've got ride leaders who are going to sort of look out for you. I think that does really help, and it definitely encourages people to do that 100K that they wouldn't have otherwise done, or encourages them to go out and do it in Essex or Kent, whereas maybe they would have just done it stuck to Richmond Park or something otherwise if they were doing it by themselves. So yeah, I think it definitely empowers people to go out, break outside their boundaries a little bit.
For sure. It's a good word, empowerment.
Yeah.
Really good word. Okay, so we touched on the women's 100. I think that's something that a lot of people listening will know, be familiar with. Are there any other like standout highlights from your time, from your 11 years at Rapha, that really stand out and stick with you as pivotal in your journey?
Oh, sure. Put me on the spot there.
So take your time, think about it. I
Yeah.
can edit out the pause.
Yeah. I really should have thought about this a bit more, actually. I think there's a lot of moments, and I think it's almost it's difficult to pinpoint. I think one of the things that I really enjoy, and it's almost like it's almost boring because it's so it's basically my other favorite thing is the weekly women's chat laps that we do on a Friday. It's We've been doing them since I think 3 years now, and we started them up just after a women's 100 because we wanted to give people a way to be able to keep coming back, to ride with us through the winter, just to keep riding and to keep kind of meeting people through Rapha, to just like continue their journey basically. And I've been ride leading those like pretty much that whole time. So most Fridays I will leave my house at 6:30 in the morning, get to Regent's Park for 7. We'll, we meet in the inner circle. We kind of meet with all the rest of the Rapha Cycling Club and Chain Gang cyclists, but then I will lead like a special women's only group. And again, it's just nice to have a space that is just for women, and it's not to kind of say that I hate riding in mixed groups, but it's just really nice to see your friends, see people that you know you're going to see, but then also meet new people. And every week there's like a new person usually. So and because you're doing laps and you kind of change every lap, so you start talking to like, you'll catch up with one friend and be like, oh, how was your week? Like, you know them really well. You get to just have a little natter, have a little gossip, which is, the best thing about cycling really. And then you'll do a rotation, then you'll start chatting to someone that you've never met before and just ask them about their story and like how they started cycling, like if they've got any plans, and you just never know who you're going to meet. And I think that's the most interesting part about cycling in a way, is because even though you meet all these new people, you always have a common ground, which is cycling. And then you can use that as a launching pad to then talk about other things, or you could just stick to talking about cycling if that's what you want to talk about. So I find that the most fun, and then you can kind of see where that, like, sometimes those people will keep coming to laps, sometimes they'll start coming to other rides as well. You'll see them go from maybe being a little bit newer to cycling, a bit more of a beginner, to then starting to do longer rides, to then doing really hard rides, and then maybe they start racing, and you're like, oh, it's really cool that I've watched that progression over the course of like months and weeks, and just catching up just on a Friday and being like, oh, what have you got up to? Oh wow, you've done your first 100 miles. That's amazing. And then like, oh, now you're going on your first cycling holiday, and it's just really nice to see those progressions kind of happen in real time.
And what it's like, it's funny, like the chat laps being like a fixed point every week,
Mm.
a relatively consistent group of women. You can see that growth much more closely than if in any other scenario, right? Like you've built yourself a little scientific echo chamber to watch these people grow, which is sort of amazing. I don't know if there are many other places like that, especially not with that level of diversity.
No, and it's really you can just kind of not like predict it, but you could just see, you just never know like when a new person turns up, you don't know if they're going to become like your best friend, or you might never see them again. So there's a kind of that element of you also don't know what's going to happen, but you also know that they could they could be your new cycling buddy, which is also nice.
That's cool. So, for anyone that's listening who maybe hasn't been on chat labs yet, do you want to just give like top level details and hopefully they can come find you?
Yeah, so it happens every Friday, Friday chat laps. In Regent's Park, it's so there's the outer circle and the inner circle. We always meet on the inner circle at 7 o'clock in the morning. We kind of everyone gathers, and then we do a little briefing. Sometimes I do the briefing at 1:15, and then we just split into groups and roll out. And if there's enough people in the women's groups, then we'll split into a slightly faster, slightly slower kind of groups, but it's always a chatty pace, and we always go at the pace that everyone is comfortable with. So sometimes we might, if we've got a slightly faster group, then we might push it a little bit just so that everyone gets, to challenge themselves a little bit. But it's always, everyone should be able to chat. That's kind of the point. And then we all go for coffee at Rapha afterwards. So you get extra time for chatting, and yeah, it's just amazing to have, you're at the clubhouse by 8:10 at the latest, so you've done a bike ride, you've socialized with people, maybe you've made a new friend, and it's not even 9 o'clock, and then you have a coffee, and then you go to work, and you're like, it's very soul kind of fulfilling, I
What a
think.
way to enrich your day. Start your
Mm.
day that way. It's little things like that that make me miss life in London. So
Mm.
I live in the country. There's
Mm.
lots of benefits. My riding is beautiful always, but
Yes.
that community is really missing. And it's funny, it swings and roundabouts because without that lack of community, I may never have started cycling culture club. But equally, whenever I do go back to London, do take
Mm.
part in one of those rides, it's really heartwarming. And I think also from a diversity standpoint, London is just significantly better than anywhere else in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be interested actually. So offline, you were saying you just gone back to see family in Wales. Like, what's the riding like there? Well, A, is the riding good, but B, how diverse is it?
Oh, I mean, I think I saw one cyclist while I was in Swansea. It
Okay.
was, yeah, the road riding is virtually, I won't say non-existent, because I do go back and do the Fest 500 sometimes, and go and ride on the Gower, and I do see fellow cyclists, but there's definitely not a culture like a community kind of culture of road cycling. I think mountain biking is more popular, which makes sense, I think, just given the terrain. Um, but there's nothing close to like a cycling culture in Wales, and it's definitely not diverse. So I would say that it's, yeah, it's very small, it's very limited in its kind of, yeah, diversity, which is a shame. But it also kind of explains why I never got into cycling while I was growing up in Wales, because I didn't even know there was a velodrome in Cardiff when I lived there. It wasn't until I left that I even knew that you could do cycling on a track there. So um, yeah, sadly, I mean, there is some great riding. There's a lot of hills. but in terms of a community activity, it's not a thing.
No. Well, you hear that, Londoners? You've got it good. Make the most of it.
Yeah, don't complain about the slog out of London anymore.
I actually I joined a ride from Via the other day and did the ride out from the sort of north towards Epping. For the first, I'd never been that way before out of town because I've always lived south of the river and always taken the West Wickham highway. And I'd forgotten quite how awful it was.
Oh, it's
Like
hideous, isn't it?
I
Yeah.
just I really do feel for you. Like it's the swings and roundabouts thing, right? Like you've got laps, which is this amazing community like tool. But the actual riding and that sort of that freedom experience that you get outside of the city is much harder to obtain. So it's sort of like a trade-off, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to do a long ride. There's no such thing as a sort of medium ride in London. You either do a short ride and you do laps, or you do, you kind of have to do upwards of 70k to make it worth it. Otherwise, you're just riding to the outer suburbs and back again, which is a hideous experience, and no one would do that. So, yeah, you kind of have to. There's no real middle ground, which I think is probably a bit of a limiting factor for people who are getting into cycling in London, and they do the laps and they enjoy it, but then when they want to do a longer ride, they're kind of put off because you can't go and do a nice ride that kind of pushes past your sort of Regent's Park laps or Richmond Park laps distance, but without, yeah, going into longer ones.
Yeah, I've had a couple of guests on so far who have similar experiences. So like a couple of guys from LA, for example, and it's the same sort of thing. You have to battle out of the city. The city is the gatekeeper to your riding experience. Like I think it's probably the same citywide, but I'm worldwide. But I'm hoping there'll be somebody who sits here who's like, oh yeah, I live in, I don't know, Munich or Frankfurt or something, and they're like, oh yeah, I can get out of the city in 20 minutes, and it's just because I feel like
Oh,
certain.
Manchester have got that
Is
actually.
it?
You can
Oh,
get into the
okay.
Peak District in like half an hour, and I'm so jealous.
That's pretty good. I suppose you must know Manchester fairly well because of Manchester, London.
Yes, yeah, and we've had a clubhouse up there for 10 years now,
Yeah.
and yeah, every time I get to go up there and do one of their rides, I'm just blown away by how stunning it is and how close it is actually to them. So jealous.
So jealous. We can but long for those spaces. So we touched on diversity a little bit there, and obviously a big part of the conversation that we're having as part of this platform is around diversity of all kinds. Now, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to ask you about your own intersectionality, which I'll be honest is not a word that I was super familiar with until we sat down with Duke and yourself the other day at Rapha HQ. So I'd love it if you could give a really quick definition to the listeners on what intersectionality is. Feel free to Google it.
Quickly bring up Wikipedia. I am going to Google it because I don't want to absolutely fluff it up.
It'd be interesting to see what that says as well, and whether that
Yeah.
resonates with you and whether you would describe it the same.
Because I definitely know that it comes from. Let me see if this is right. Oh no, there isn't like an easy one. Yeah, okay. I mean, this is not very useful. Oh no, hang on. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, which is the year that I was born.
There we go.
Yeah, she describes how interlocking systems of power affect those who are most marginalized in society. Activists and academics use the framework to promote social and political egalitarianism. And okay, So within this framework, discrimination against Black women cannot be explained as a simple combination of misogyny and racism, but something more complicated. Intersectionality engages in similar themes as triple oppression, which is the oppression of being associated with a poor or immigrant woman of color. Okay.
It's complex, very complex.
Very complex. And yes, I would definitely not consider myself an expert in this area from an academic point of view, or even an activist point of view. To be honest, I can only really say just from my sort of lived experience, I guess, and just what I know of it from, yeah, just being aware, just being a sort of compassionate human being. But yeah, so from my point of view, like intersectionality is that you can experience discrimination on multiple levels and like multiple facets of your identity. And sometimes parts of your identity will be a positive, like sometimes it can bring you benefits and privileges, and sometimes they won't. So, you know, as I'm a woman of color, I'm also bisexual. Like it, the intersectionality is quite interesting because even though I do kind of tick a lot of boxes of the kind of diversity and inclusion, I also am passing enough to not to have some of the privileges that come from sort of passing as white a lot of the time. Like I'm mixed race. Like I wear eyeliner to kind of cover up some of my Asian features, which I find has helped in, just people not treating me differently from the off because, and my mannerisms and, my accent is obviously very British, although not as Welsh as it once was, as we discussed. But, I have a lot of things that kind of give me a lot of privilege, where some people might actually face discrimination. So even though I do, and I'm bi, but I've only ever had male kind of long-term partners. And yeah, I'm a woman in a fairly male-dominated industry, but I think I've been very lucky in that I've always had really amazing female bosses who have always really fought for me, and I think the atmosphere, like the Rapha, has been a really supportive place for me personally. So I haven't felt like I've faced discrimination like as being a woman here. So it's weird because like I do have a kind of lot of intersectional aspects to my identity, but I also don't feel like I've faced nearly as much like discrimination as others have. So it's a tricky one for me to talk about because yeah, I really I like I kind of see it, but I also haven't experienced it to the extent that other people have.
Yeah, I think that's really it's really poignant because it's very honest. And it's really easy as a person from a minority group of any kind to sort of take it as an excuse to be a certain way. I'm not saying everyone does this, but you definitely see it. And to be able to see your privilege, I think, is one of the biggest takeaways there. And I've had to come to terms with my own privilege. As we've embarked on this journey. So I think the awareness there is super key for people. And I think even though you may be fortunate, your bosses may have been supportive, your environment might have been perfect. The climate in that at the right time might have just aligned with where you were. All of those things, speculation that we'll never answer on today's show. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you will have had to have dealt with that at some point in your life, and I think what you've done, maybe unbeknownst to yourself, or maybe certainly in the more subconscious areas, is you've used your privilege and your position to make it better for others in that space, and for that, you should be commended because there's no point having a superpower, which is to have that sort of intersectional part of your life and haven't had to necessarily struggle through it. That's superpower, right? You could have bottled that and just, head on your merry way and lived your life, but you haven't. You've dedicated a lot of energy and a lot of time to making others in a similar position seen and heard. And the cycling industry isn't great, but I'd say Rapha does the best job of any brand in cycling at the moment. Um, and I would put good money on the fact that that's part of your influence at that company for the last 11 years. This is not just to blow smoke up you, but there's a real, not a lack, because it's not a lack. There's loads of great people doing great stuff, but to be a woman in a position of power at a company like Rapha, globally known, is rare. So to be a woman in a position of power at a global company like Rapha, who represents so many different groups, it's nothing short of well, fascinating, but also amazing. And I think there's so much a lot of people will take from that. Partly in terms of inspiration, like, hell, I can get there. Um, but also remembering that, starting small, connecting on a community level, building friends, and being seen is, I think, the one thing that a lot of people, anyone, can do on a fairly local and grassroots level to change this industry long term. I don't know if you agree. I've just spoken at you for a while, but there's vast amounts that you may disagree with, but yeah, just my thoughts on the matter, I think.
No, I totally agree, and I do think that yeah, being visible, just being out there. There was actually a really memorable thing that somebody said to me once, which was, so when I was racing, and like I said, I wasn't great at racing. I was pretty average at it. But often I was the only woman of color on the start line of a lot of these races, and I kind of never really considered myself a woman of color until somebody messaged me and said, "Oh, seeing you on the start line as the only woman of color inspired me to start racing, and made me think that I could do it myself." And then she was like racing in a way higher level and way more seriously than me at that point. But she said that she'd seen me a couple of years before and thought like, oh, if she can do that, I can do that too. Um, and that was like a really meaningful moment for me, because I was like, oh, even though I was a bit crap at racing, the fact that somebody else saw me and thought, oh, okay, that means I can do it too. That was a kind of bit of a light bulb moment for me, because it made me realize that I didn't have to be good at things to be a role model, or just being out there and existing at doing one thing or another just proves that it's possible. And like, yeah, like being at Rapha and doing all the things that I do, I think does make a difference, and it does show that cycling is changing and evolving, hopefully, because when you have more people like me in those positions, like, even though I don't feel like I've experienced too much discrimination or anything like that, I am always thinking about those groups and how we can make it so that the pathway is easier for them, and like remove barriers and obstacles that they might face, because I just have a much keener awareness of those barriers, like creating those kind of inclusive groups, like women only groups, or I've done like Ramadan laps for the Muslim cycling community, and like LGBTQ plus kind of events and rides. And people sometimes ask me like, why do these groups need their own space? Like what makes them so special that they need to have their own dedicated space? And it's just that I know that when you're in a space and you know that everyone else is like you just feel so much more at home, and you feel a lot less nervous or intimidated, because you're not expected to be someone that you're not. And I think that's what makes me want to do those things for all of these groups, just to make sure that they kind of have that same welcoming kind of feeling that I had when I was going to the fixed gear scene or went to Herne Hill women's sessions, that made me want to keep coming back. I think it's like making those spaces, and I guess without that kind of intersectional identity that I have and being conscious of it, I probably wouldn't have put so much energy into making those spaces for people, because I might not have understood why they were needed.
I mean, I couldn't have asked for a more sort of poignant and powerful way to end this, because I think only by sort of slightly forcing you to talk about it, where prior to this you may have been a little bit, you might have a bit of trepidation. I think you realise quite what that has done for the communities where you operate, and it's super cool. So well done, you. There's a question I like to ask everybody to finish up, and that is, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody from an underrepresented group to get them to enter cycling or to stay in cycling, what would it be?
I think develop a habit of riding regularly with friends. Because I think once you have other people to hold you accountable to ride, and you have people that you want to ride with because you enjoy spending time with them and socializing and having all of that kind of, all of the personal stuff that makes it nice to hang out with other people, you'll want to keep doing it, and you'll want to keep, whether it's a weekly chat laps thing or whether it's on the weekend and you could just go for a nice ride somewhere. I think trying to build a habit of riding with friends is just a really nice way of building up your I guess affinity with cycling in a positive way, because it'll just make you just want to hang out with your friend and ride bikes at the same time and have a nice coffee. So yeah, I think it's probably that. Don't try and start a training plan and kill yourself getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day to go and do intervals. Just go and ride bikes with friends.
Yeah, find some semblance of enjoyment that is easy to repeat, and bikes, friends, coffee. What's not to like?
Yeah, exactly. It's the perfect combination.
To completely agree. Jess, thank you. I've loved that. I knew it'd be a good one. I knew it in my soul. I'm really looking forward to getting this out, and so people can listen, because I think there's so much wisdom in everything that you said, and hopefully some inspiration in there too. So if some people might pick up and maybe do something in their own community, maybe come and join a chat laps.
Please do.
And
welcome.
yeah, I know they will be welcome, and they'll be well looked after, and maybe they'll be your next friend.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Well, no doubt, I'll see you later in the week, 100%.
Yes.
But by the time this podcast comes out, we will have done a couple of cool things. So probably spent some time together at Rudo Live, I hope. We'll have spent time with Team Armani towards the end of the week, which will be wicked. And no doubt many other cool things. But no, I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I shall see you soon.
Yeah, enjoy your delivery.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Take care, Jess. Bye.